Pan-Africanism, it would be very hard to achieve political, economic, and cultural Pan-Africanism. Linguistic Pan-Africanism, in my opinion, encourages the promotion of many indigenous lingua franca in the different regions of Africa, with the ultimate aim being possibly to create a Pan-African lingua franca. And Swahili stands a strong chance here. Swahili, or what some Pan-Africanists like me call Afrihili. Now, I want to connect this idea of Pan-Africanism, of linguistic Pan-Africanism, to an important idea of global future. And what is global future? Global future refers to any major worldwide event that can potentially change some systems. One study by Bodomo describes global futures as referring to ongoing and emerging planetary scale processes and to their efficacy and real effects, rather than to abstract clock time. She interrogates what then are the relevant global procedures which are open towards the future. Another study, Rosberg, talks of global future in terms of how global climatic conservation can be achieved for economic prosperity. They continue to say, to reverse nature's decline and for humanity to enjoy a sustainable and prosperous future, we urgently need transformational change across our economic and financial systems, so they are geared towards delivering long-term sustainable development and the protection and restoration of nature. We need to agree on a new deal for nature and people to reverse the loss of biodiversity by 2030, that is 8 years from now, and put nature on a path to recovery for the benefit of people and planet. In this lecture, we want to view language as part of global ecology that must be preserved. And I will make the case for that as time goes on. Therefore, the claim is that evolving and implementing a cogent linguistic Pan-Africanist policy can place Africa in such a strong position that Africa can create tectonic changes in the world, as any global future does, and thus ensures that Africa successfully develops its economy and takes its rightful position in the committee of great nations of the world. The lecture interrogates aspects of these notions with a view to addressing questions such as how can Africa place itself linguistically to compete economically and culturally? What are the strategies for evolving and implementing effective Pan-Africanist language policies to ensure that Africa has a bright global future? We cannot talk about all these things without going back to the linguistics and philosophies of language. Language is always a central issue in this topic. So I'd like to begin the next section of my talk by looking a little bit about the nature of language. The nature of language as part of my literature review on the theoretical and methodological aspects of the talk. Language is not just only a system of communication, of coding and decoding signs, it is an important identity marker. Within linguistics and philosophical domains, language is often viewed as an object with which we use to interpret the nature and the world around us. And there's even a strong claim, which is often called by linguists and philosophers the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, that the structure of one's language determines the way in which one categorizes and interprets reality. Language is also an important repository of our culture, and is indeed the medium through which we express various aspects of culture, like folk tales, songs, and dances. Just now you heard about songs and dances from my hometown. They were using our language to express that. When you talk about Africa, the issue of multilingualism also comes in. In a multilingual setup, as in the case of all African countries, the language question becomes a prominent issue. Each country, each region of Africa has a myriad of indigenous African languages and a substantial number of foreign non-African languages. African polities are quintessentially multilingual, and a large number of them, especially in Africa south of the Sahara, still continue to use former colonial languages as official languages and languages of education. The question then arises as to how to manage this situation. The classical position has mostly been to say that having so many languages in each country is a problem. In the case of Africa, it is even often seen as the basis of ethnic tensions in much of Africa, because in much of Africa, language is strongly tied to ethnicity. Let's look into a broader issue about the languages. How many languages do we have in the world? In a 2009 study, it was found in Inaugural Languages of the World, it was found that there are over 7,000 languages in the world. And if you look at the diagram well, Africa has the second largest number of languages in the world, only after Asia. So Africa has about 2,100 languages, while Asia has about 2,300 languages. So both Asia and Africa are very multilingual. Just compare that with Europe, which just has about less than 300 languages. So the ecology of language in the world is that there's so many languages in the world, and each of these languages are resources for which people use to develop their society. The next map is a map of Africa showing language families of Africa. Like human beings, languages also have families, and we categorize them as such. And in Africa, we have several language families, including the Afro-Asiatic, the Nilo-Saharan, Niger-Congo, two types of Niger-Congo languages, and one of them is the famous Bantu languages. And we have the Khoisan languages, and we also have the Austronesian languages. Now, we may sometimes think that there's such a huge diversity in the world, but the next diagram from me shows that of all the world's population, 2/3 of the world's population speak only just 12 languages, the 12 largest languages as their mother tongue. So only 12 languages are spoken by 2/3 of the world's population as their mother tongue, including Chinese, Hindu, Arabic, Spanish, English, Bengali, Portuguese, Italian, German, Japanese, French, and Russian. So as you can see, with the exception of Arabic, no African languages features in this. The next diagram is a table showing the major indigenous African languages. And I've divided them into West African languages, Southern African languages, East African languages, Central African languages, North African languages, the five regions, the 5 economic regions of Africa. Each of these, with West Africa having the largest number of languages, the most diversified, the most populous in Africa. All this goes to show that there's a strong idea of language diversity in Africa. And this language diversity is a double-edged sword. It can cut both ways. On the one hand, each of these over 2,000 languages in Africa is the basis of a rich culture, as languages are the main media through which we express and convey our cultural values, as I said earlier. On the other hand, the fact that we have many languages within each of the 50-odd polities in Africa means that we face serious challenges and problems of language policy formulation and language planning. I must emphasize that the languages themselves are not the problem. Every language is always a resource for its people. So the languages themselves are not the problem. The problem is the problem comes about, serious problem of how to decide, for instance, which languages to use in our national institutions. And it is this problem that has often led to the idea that the languages of the former colonial powers still dominate the linguistic scenes in most countries of Africa, leading to inappropriate terminologies like Afriphone, Francophone, Lusophone, that is Europhone, African countries of Africa. The truth marked by these terminologies is that we indeed have clearly Afriphone and not Europhone countries in Africa, since the vast majority of the population actually speaks African languages as mother tongue and lingua franca, languages of wider communication, but are rarely permitted to use these languages in the formal education, especially at the higher levels and in other official settings. So this is a general idea of the nature of language. And I want to get into, to begin to look at a few things about the theoretical underpinnings of a theory of linguistic Pan-Africanism. So I want to propose a theory of linguistic Pan-Africanism. And in this theory, in this framework, I recognize 4 underpinnings. The first underpinning is that is the primacy of indigenous African languages. I believe that all the languages, indigenous languages of Africa, are important tools for the socio-economic and socio-cultural development of Africa. Another underpinning is that I believe strongly in mother tongue education. Indigenous mother tongue education is an essential feature of the theoretical model of linguistic Pan-Africanism outlined here. Then I also have what is called linguistic human rights. I interpret language rights in terms of human rights. And the important maxim of right of language and right to language, that's just 2 maxims, right of language and right to language. This Ali Mazroui's terms that he has always argued for. The right of language is saying that every community has a right to a language. So if a government has a policy that prevents a language, a community from using its language, it is against this right of language. But there's also the maxim of right to language, such that if an individual has the right to use the languages they're most proficient in for their day-to-day activities and for economic activities. So thanks to Ali Mazrui for these important terms. The 4th underpinning of my theory of linguistic Pan-Africanism is that it's language diversity as a global future, coming back to our topic. There is a clear link between language preservation and environmental preservation. And I'm arguing that if climatic and environmental sustenance are important global issues, then language and its preservation are crucial parts of this global issue. So it's not just, we don't see language. The fact that we see plants and animals doesn't mean that language, and we don't see language, doesn't mean that it's not a system. We need to preserve this system too in this constellation. In terms of methodological issues for my work, for my talk, it's based on several years of work that I've done in my life as a linguist. The research presented here is based on different contexts of research involving a mix of qualitative and quantitative data collection and analysis methods over a lifetime of observations and reflections on the nature of language and linguistic studies involving African languages. So a lot of archival research has gone into collating various data and ideas. This is also the basis of extensive debates in various fora. Coming back to the language question, Pan-Africanism is, as I said, one of the prominent concepts in the study of Africa and its place in Africa. So there are 2 types of Pan-Africanism, as often said. We just saw 2 various levels of Pan-Africanism, but there are 2 types of Pan-Africanism. The Pan in the term simply means all. That is encompassing all Africans and everything African. A study by Shepperson and many other writers suggests that we should distinguish between 2 types of Pan-Africanism on the basis of whether we are dealing with a small p as in pan, as you can see on the screen, right? Or whether we are dealing with a capital P as in pan. Now, what is Pan-Africanism with a big P, with a capital P? Pan-Africanism, with a capital P, refers to the body of ideas and literature evolved at formal meetings and congresses. In the 20th century, about 5 major Pan-African congresses were held in various cities around the world, from Paris in France to Manchester in the United Kingdom. It was at these meetings, attended by prominent scholars and political figures from William Du Bois to Kwame Nkrumah, that the key tenets of Pan-Africanism were discussed. I would add that the various efforts by African leaders to achieve political unity, leading to the formation of the Organization of African Unity and the OAU, and which later got renamed as the African Union. So that is Pan-Africanism. It's more like government-to-government levels of Pan-Africanism. But there's also a people-to-people levels of Pan-Africanism. So we'll call that Pan-Africanism with a small p. Comprises lower-level manifestations by people of African descent. So it means that it comprises people of African descent, both within Africa and outside Africa. So in other words, I would add that at any time a group of Africans and people of African origins decide to come together to address their interests, they are practicing Pan-Africanism with a small p, so people-to-people Pan-Africanism. The definition, therefore, we choose to crystallize on in this talk is Pan-Africanism is an ideological notion that champions the need for Africans, and all people of African descent to unite and work towards a better future for the continent and for Africans and all people of African descent. Now, the term Africa too has to be deconstructed, right? In my use of the term Africa, I cover all the entire landmass of the continent and its islands. We do not make a distinction between the Maghreb and sub-Saharan Africa. In fact, we avoid the term sub-Saharan Africa altogether. In many European conceptualizations of Africa, especially the philosopher Hegel, there is this keen attempt to distinguish between countries like Egypt, Tunisia, Algeria, Libya, Morocco, and the rest of Africa. In the spirit of Pan-Africanism, Africa includes all parts of Africa, whether north or south of the Sahara Desert. So Africans, in this context, refer to citizens and indigenous peoples of all the countries on the African continent, and most or all of whom are members of the African Union. Africans also include people of African descent who live outside Africa and who trace their ancestry and identity to the African continent. The term diaspora is often used to refer to these people. And some of the major names associated with Pan-Africanism is people like Marcus Garvey, Kwame Nkrumah, who I've mentioned several times, Patrice Lumumba, Amilcar Cabral, Tafawa Balewa, Sekou Touré, Jomo Kenyatta, Julius Nyerere, Haile Selassie, Gamal Abdel Nasser, Ahmed Ben Bella, Robert Mugabe, Nelson Mandela, Muammar Gaddafi, Thomas Sankara, and so on and so forth. Indeed, one of the most important and concise explanations of Pan-Africanism is by Felix, a study by Felix, who sees Pan-Africanism as a concept of unity in diversity in terms of the extended and expanded African community. I now go on to sketch to give a diagrammatical sketch of my theory of linguistic Pan-Africanism. You can see that this is a triangle with 3 levels: the base, the meso, and the apex. The base, as you can see, the base is where we talk about the diversity of the continent, the mother tongue education, which involves all indigenous African languages. The base is very important. It says that in the educational structure, every child should be given the opportunity to read and write and to learn and to study in their mother tongue, incontestably. No, this is a very important aspect. And of course, whenever we talk about mother tongue is a very controversial thing. So I would like to say a few words about that. At a recent panel discussion, also many other times, I stated for the umpteenth time that the best language policy for Africa, for anywhere in Africa, is one that ensures that every child is able to be literate, that is, read and write in their mother tongue, or what linguists sometimes call the L1, that is first language. I recognize that these terms are not problem-free. The term mother tongue means the language which a person has grown up speaking from early childhood. Now, in my mother tongue, or L1 in Dagari, we use, and Dagari is a Mabia language in northern Ghana, we use the term Tenge Kokore. In other words, in other African languages like Akan and Hausa, it may translate as Krum Kasa or Hashen Garena, respectively. Now, one of the reasons someone might object to the term mother tongue or L1 is to say that, well, children in the urban centers of Africa grow up speaking many languages, making the term mother tongue or L1 problematic. Yes, it is problematic, and one must always unpack it. But here are the issues. First, it is not impossible to have 2 or more L1s or mother tongues in a multilingual setup. Second, and as a rural African, I grew up in northwestern Ghana. As someone who grew up in a rural area of Africa, I sometimes get unsettled how some linguists or other social scientists try to impose what happens in the cities of Africa on all of Africa. One example that is often given is that a child in the urban centers like Nima, a suburb of Accra, may grow up speaking Ga, Hausa, Chui, and Ewe at the same time. So what is their mother tongue? Now, the fact that this happens in the cities doesn't mean that it happens throughout Africa. In very many rural areas of Africa, and I must agree that there are some rural areas by roads or near cities that are also multilingual. I'm not saying they're not multilingual, but what I'm saying is that in some of these places, the term mother tongue is incontestably clear. The term Tenge Kokor, mother tongue, refers to a specific language and is unmistakable. To complicate matters, some Africans in the diaspora growing up in places like America, Europe, France, Germany, as part of their Pan-African nationalism, they feel somehow ashamed calling their most proficient language, like English and French or German, their mother tongue, and therefore want to throw away the term. For that, linguists have saved them. Linguists have a term which is called the heritage language. What is a heritage language? A heritage language is for children in the diaspora. Your heritage language is or are your African languages, probably spoken to you by your parents at home. But English is your mother tongue. French is your mother tongue. German is your mother tongue. Portuguese is your mother tongue. I remember there was a debate, a literary debate between Professor Ngugi wa Thiong'o and many people, including one of his sons, who is of Swedish, whose mother is Swedish. And this young man kept on saying, okay, in my mother tongue, Swedish, while everybody else in the debate were talking about in our mother tongue, Gikuyu. So it was very interesting. But Professor Ngugi's son, his mother tongue may be Swedish, but his heritage language is Kikuyu, right? So this is very important. In fact, I sometimes use the term language identity, language of identity, to solve all these problems. So my language of identity, my Tenge Kokor, my Krum Kasa, my Mashingarena is Dagari. Let's move on to the meso level. Sorry, I haven't completed there. So I am also surprised, and I also need to talk about indigenous African languages, because this is also contested. I am also surprised at why some linguists question the term indigenous African languages. The term indigenous is a denotation that simply refers to an entity that originates or occurs naturally in a particular locus, an entity which is native to a particular locality. Any negative connotation or terms indigenous result from a poor understanding of this denotation and cannot be a reason why we should abandon the term indigenous African languages. Any language spoken in Africa by communities of people whose original homeland is not traced outside Africa is an indigenous African language. And I move on to the meso level, so where I talk about regional lingua franca. And in this level, I am looking at I'm dividing Africa into the various regions: North Africa, East Africa, Central Africa, Southern Africa, as we saw earlier, West Africa. I'm talking about the kind of lingua franca that could be developed from them. The most important step, as I said, for all governments in Africa is to ensure that all children in Africa learn how to read and write in their Tenge Kokor, in their Kurum Kasa, in their Mashingarena. Then at least one other language of their country. In fact, in the Achampong era, they had a very wonderful policy that said that every Ghanaian should try and learn another Ghanaian language. That's the idea that is being said here. So Arabic, Amharic, Zulu, Lingala, Hausa, and each representing North, East, Southern, Central, and West Africa, respectively. These are some of the languages that could be learned as lingua franca. Other important languages in West Africa, which is the most diverse part of Africa, could include Bambara, Wolof, Akan, Ewe, Yoruba, and Igbo. And indeed, Bambara has been made a national language now in Mali. And I want to move on to the apex of the triangle. The apex of the triangle is where, so you can see the base is diversity. As we move along, we're moving into uniformity. So diversity and uniformity are both important for language policy. At the apex level, I'm trying to propose a uniform lingua franca for Africa. The apex of the diagram indicates that Africans should agree on a single continental lingua franca. And the best candidate for this is Swahili. So far, it is the most widespread indigenous African language. It is also the most international African language, south of the Sahara, and it is taught and broadcast in many parts of the world. The African Union could have a policy statement that by the year 2050, that is in the middle of the 21st century, a modernized form of Swahili called Afrihili or Ki-Afrihili should become the sole language of the African Union, not just only a co-official language with English, French, and Portuguese. In fact, we should throw away English, French, and Portuguese as official languages of the African Union and have only Swahili as official language. Right now, Swahili is just a co-official language with English, French, and Portuguese. It should not only be taught in most universities in Africa, and I'm very proud of my alma mater, the University of Ghana. It is one of the few universities in Africa that teaches an African language, not being a Ghanaian language. So I learned Swahili at the University of Ghana 40 years ago. That was very visionary. So it should not only be taught in most universities in Africa, it should indeed be the medium of instruction in at least one university in each of the 55 African countries. Now, when we talk about Afrihili, Afrihili must not be thought of as only a linguistic touch-up of Swahili, but as a modernized form of Swahili that develops enough terminologies and concepts for the teaching of African history, culture, tradition, geography, philosophies, and so on. It would be important for all African children from different parts of Africa sitting in the same classroom to learn about traditional African heritages that is in a common African language, not in English, French, or Swahili. So these are the three levels. And I'll go on. Now, you have seen a curious idea of circles outside the level, the diagram. At each level, of course, I am not by this lecture saying that we should abandon, every country learns foreign languages. European countries have their national languages, but they also learn foreign languages. The fact that Africa should have its own and concentrate on its own language doesn't mean that we should avoid learning foreign language. So at each level, there is a provision for learning for foreign language education, as you can see in the diagram. So that's very important. It's not to say that we abandon, but we should not use foreign languages as our national languages. We should not use foreign languages as our continental African language. At every level, the base, the meso, and the apex of the triangle, there is an additional reference to foreign language education, which is outside the triangle. These foreign languages include the current media of instruction languages such as English, French, and Portuguese in each of the so-called Anglophone, Francophone, and Lusophone African countries. Terms we reject in the theoretical model of linguistic Pan-Africanism. In fact, this is one of the first times that a language policy proposal for Africa does not accord a central position for Africa's former colonial languages. I mean, somebody may say that, well, this is wishful thinking, but let me say that it was wishful thinking when our ancestors were clamoring for slavery to end, but it became a reality. It was wishful thinking when our ancestors were clamoring for Africans to be independent, but now it is a reality. It may seem wishful now, but I believe that in future, Africa can have its own languages as languages of education and so on. That sends me to the fourth and fifth parts of my talk, and these parts have taken a life of their own, so I'm not going to spend too much time on them, except to summarize what I say in them. In section 4 of my talk, I talk about how to implement the theoretical ideas of linguistic Pan-Africanism in the educational sector based on the principle of localized additive trilingualism. Additive bilingualism or additive trilingualism says that you learn a language and then use that language to learn another language and carry on with that language such that you go on. So you use both at the same time as equally. But subtractive bilingualism is what we have had in most of our educational system. You use your mother tongue to learn English, and from then onwards, you just drop your mother tongue and just use English throughout. That is subtractive bilingualism. I am arguing for additive bilingualism. So section 5 of mine, I call them chapters because the lecture has taken a life of its own into a book. So they are chapters. Section 5 talks about how to address the burning question in African literature. And the question is, should we continue to use the former colonial languages as Chinua Achebe would want us to have, Chinua Achebe, the famous Nigerian writer, or should we increasingly use African languages as Ngugi wa Thiong'o, the Kenyan writer, wants us to have? Of course, our answer is very clear here. African languages are the most prototypical languages to be used for writing by Africans, and all African writers should increasingly move to writing in African languages. And I move on to the sixth part of my talk, and that is where I begin to cue in the idea of linguistic Pan-Africanism as a global future, and also how to project Africa into the world. We have already defined and explained the concept of global future as an event that can bring seismic changes to the world at large. Examples of global futures are or events and happenings that may have widespread effects on the world. These include climate change, and we've had several levels of problem. They include migration, they include robotics, they include space technology, and they include blockchains. The Maxim in these climate conferences is always talking about our common future, meaning that all human beings have a common future, have an interest in managing these current happenings that can have major impact on all of us, our global future. Now, scholars like V.J. Prashad, who argue that the idea of a common global future may indeed be rather idealistic and indeed goes to serve Western interests more than the interests of the global South. We may indeed not have a common future with the West or a global North as a whole, as we, the people of global South, have not even secured our present. So why talk about the future if we don't secure the present? If we don't secure the present, there will be no future. I argue here that language policy, language preservation in general, and linguistic Pan-Africanism in particular, must be seen as an important aspect of our global future, of our survival for the future. So far, the topic of language preservation in linguistics and in other areas, or language revitalization, has not often featured much in issues of environmental conservation. And this is a great mistake. Linguists must make a clear link between the policy of language documentation, preservation, and revitalization as an important aspect of the global future phenomenon of climate and environmental preservation. What's the point in preserving trees and preserving animals whose names you don't even know any longer in your language? What's the point? So we need to, these values, human values, and the animals and the environment, they go together, hand in hand together. Linguistic Pan-Africanism is an attempt to preserve, to revitalize, and to promote African languages as a way to secure Africa's present so that Africa can be prepared to take part in our common global future with other parts of the world. I will now, at this point, begin to propose about 3 strategies for promoting African languages. The first one, one aspect of the rise of many of nations and parts of the world is that they take their languages with them as they rise. Linguistic issues are an important part of the foreign policy of rising nations. As Africa rises, and I believe Africa will rise, and as African voices become more prominent in the world, Africa must not showcase itself in the medium of only English, French, and Portuguese. That is, in the medium of the former colonial languages. Africa must go into the world in the medium of indigenous African languages. African culture and African soft power must be manifested in African languages. The first suggestion I make is to create, to establish African cultural institutes worldwide. And these institutes should be run not by foreigners, but by the African Union or the individual African polities. My proposal has been, in some of my papers, has been to call them Mandela Institutes. Though, of course, we can also reserve some of them for other Pan-African icons like Kwame Nkrumah, Thomas Sankara, Abdel Nasser, Malemu Julius Nyerere, or Tafawa Balewa. These Mandela Institutes would be mandated to teach African languages and cultures worldwide with a curriculum designed by a coordinating body in Africa that produces curricular content for the teaching of these languages and the cultures associated with them. We should also have standardized tests for these languages. A coordinating committee for creating standards for testing proficiency levels must be established. A standardized test called Test of African Languages as Foreign Language, TALAFOL, must be established. The curriculum should be the same for all African languages, such that, for example, we can have TALAFOL Afrihili, TALAFOL Hausa, TALAFOL Yoruba, TALAFOL Igbo, TALAFOL Akan, TALAFOL Dagane, Dagare, TALAFOL Muri, TALAFOL everything. Of course, it might also be possible to find an African name for the test so that we avoid using the acronym TALAFOL. Funding should entirely be from Africa and its diaspora. We must reverse the trend where foreign bodies from places like Europe and China come to invest in Africa, create institutions for teaching us their languages, to a situation where we create institutions and require them to learn our languages in order to ply their trade in Africa. Now, I also have a role for the African diaspora. I've had many meetings with several bodies and advised them on several issues concerning the African continent, the African diaspora. In one of these periodic African diaspora meetings, often facilitated by the African Union, stakeholders must agree on a 5-year plan, say from 2025 to 2030, to encourage all second and subsequent generation African diaspora members to acquire a major African language in passing TALAFOL Afrihili, TALAFOL Hausa, TALAFOL Zulu, and so on. This way, African languages will automatically become widespread all over the world. As someone who has advised the African Union and facilitated such meetings, it is my wish that one day, before 2050, we would be able to hold our meetings completely in Afrihili. One of the best strategies for promoting African languages worldwide is if Africa gets its diaspora members speaking, reading, and writing African languages. I now begin to put the plane down and conclusion. Yeah. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm now beginning to conclude. I have so far begun with a description of my terminologies, and I have outlined my theoretical underpinnings, and I have proposed a theory of linguistic Pan-Africanism. I will now talk about, and I've also talked about strategies for promoting African languages worldwide. I will now propose 10 recommendations, which are called 10 tenets of linguistic Pan-Africanism, as part of my conclusion. The first is that we must secure the base. We must be literate. Every African should be literate in your language of identity. Every African child should be given the opportunity to learn to speak, read, and write in their mother tongue or L1 or any of the languages of identity. The first tenet builds on Professor Ngu Wationgo's 2016 study where he talks about the importance of the mother tongue and beyond. The second tenet of the 10 tenets of linguistic Pan-Africanism is that we should evolve linguistic Pan-African policies. Most, in fact, all current national language policies in Africa are both nationalistic and Eurocentric, but not Pan-Africanist enough. For instance, one of the most important national language policies in Africa, the South African language policy, which was evolved under Mandela's rule, recognizes 11 languages, including indigenous South African languages, including Afrikaans, and including English, but not a single language beyond Southern Africa. Every African child must be given the opportunity to speak, read, and write in at least 3 languages: their language of identity, 1 African language, and Swahili, along with 1 international non-African language as an added bonus, not as a compulsory requirement. Tenet number 3, language of literary expression. Every African writer should first and foremost endeavor to write in his or her language of identity or any other African language. Fourth tenet, regional Pan-African lingua franca. Every political, economic region of Africa, North, Southern, East, West, and Central, should evolve 1 to 3 regional lingua franca. For instance, Arabic in the North, Swahili, Amharic in the East, Zulu in the South, Lingala in Central Africa, and Hausa, Bambara, and Wolof in West Africa. African languages, as number 5th tenet, should be part and parcel of the service of Africa. Knowledge of an African language besides one's own is a requirement for serving in regional and continental level organizations. Tenet number 6, avoid petty nationalism and Eurocentrism in national language policy. All national language policies attempt to be nationalistic, as I said earlier. Indeed, most are Eurocentric and few are Pan-Africanist in orientation. It is time to start seeing cross-regional language learning. For instance, is it not good to see East Africans learning West African languages and vice versa? North Africans learning Southern African languages and vice versa. Why is it that all African languages teach all the foreign languages, English, French, and no African language in each of the regions teaches languages from the other region besides my own university, my own alma mater, the University of Ghana? Tenet number 7, we should generously fund the African language agenda. Regional and continental level institutions and charity organizations and individual Africans should dedicate sections of their running costs to funding prizes and research grants for the promotion of African languages and literatures. Scholarship schemes should be set up for foreign students to learn African languages. When I was going to study in Norway and other parts of the world, I had to learn how to do TOEFL. I hope that one day somebody coming to study in Africa will learn TOEFL. Tenet number 8, Africa, language of the diaspora. All diaspora Africans should be encouraged to learn to speak, read, and write Swahili, and eventually Afrihili, as it has the greatest potential of becoming the most widespread African language. Tenet number 9, on Afrihili. African linguists must work towards developing Swahili, the most widespread Pan-African language, into an official Pan-African language called Afrihili, with a large segment of vocabularies from many African languages being part of the new language. Tenet number 10, African languages in the world. All foreign students who come to study in Africa, most people seeking permanent residence permits in Africa, must be made to pass standardized tests in an African language. Getting to the end, let me now say a few things about challenges. In preparing, Mr. Chairman, in preparing this lecture, a colleague who read through a preliminary version of the work asks why I am writing a 100-page lecture that no one will act on. He asked me if I trust the African Union or African governments that much to waste my time. Well, I'm not wasting my time. Well, my response is that as a scholar of African linguistics and literature, and as an advocate for the promotion of the use of African languages, it is my duty first to contribute to the body of literature on how we can do this, and then second, to advocate and campaign for the African Union and national and regional governments to act. Who knows what happens in the next 5 to 10 years? A new era may come in which new actors at the African Union within national and regional governments will be looking into the archives for solutions, for answers to the language question in Africa. A second challenge is that the question is often posed to me whether I am not proposing an educational system in which children will learn too many languages. Well, it is not asking too much. My answer is that it's not asking too much to propose a Pan-Africanist language policy involving additive trilingualism in an already hyper-diverse and multilingual continent like Africa. In fact, many Africans already speak 3 or more languages. So all we are asking is for them to learn to read and write in these languages. It is not enough to just speak the language. You should be able to read and write in them. The third challenge is on the issue of resources. A question is often asked, where do we get money to mount programs in all these languages? Well, my answer is that it's a question of priority. A lot of money has been spent in teaching Africans how to read and write in the former colonial languages throughout Africa. If only we could spend even half of what we spend teaching English, French, and Portuguese in teaching African languages, there would be enough resources to go around in implementing our linguistic Pan-Africanist model of localized additive trilingualism. Before I conclude, let me acknowledge a few people who have helped me. I wish to acknowledge the following individuals and institutions without whom the lecture would not have been possible. All my Akan translations, Mandagari translation, Hausa translation, Swahili translation, Arabic translation, Amharic translations, different various people have helped me, and I'll mention all the names. My academic colleagues have helped me make comments on my work, and my secretary at the University of Vienna has helped me with PowerPoint. And I want to thank the Bawa group from my hometown who came to perform. I want to thank everybody who has helped me in one way or the other in doing this. So, Baraka, Akwe, Midasi, Nagodi, Asante Sana. Thank you.
As you can see, the applause signifies the satisfaction of the audience in the journey you took them on this evening. Listen, this was a lecture of ideas. basically for you to imagine something that is not here right now. Our lecturer, Professor Bodomo, obviously started very young, just like our students here. He started to construct a language for Ghana when he was an undergraduate, right? So it shows you that he has followed a particular path for a very long time. And so whatever he has to tell us is really eye-opening. I got many points out of this lecture. For one thing, he told us that there are like global languages that expand over big territories or capture a lot of people. And he says 12 languages are spoken by or are used by 2/3 of the world. That is quite phenomenal. It is like the way certain phenomena just explode and agglomerate. They call it Pareto distribution, where in this particular case, half a percentage of languages captures 66% of the world. Now, when you also look at it on a smaller scale, that is, go to national scale, or you go to town scale, you might see similar phenomenon occurring. But because we look at the global picture, we tend to see only the big things. But it's like that in many, many things, whether it's about wealth distribution, whether it's about the formation of big cities, mega cities, and the movement of people, the thing that he calls the global futures. All of these phenomena tend to agglomerate and have these kinds of bases. I was also interested in his theory of linguistic Pan-Africanism. Obviously, he has thought very hard about these issues, and the principles that he advocated are quite intuitive and very much a way of building the foundation, because he constructs the foundation as the mother tongue, then he goes to regional lingua franca, and then he goes to continental lingua franca. But these are all ideas. It doesn't mean that it's here today, right? Because just like big empires, someday we have Rome, and Rome is no more. Some big things can change over time. And the British were, many, many years ago, they said their empire, sun never set on their empire. But it's no longer like that. So big ideas sometimes promote us to think fresh about things. I like this idea of linguistic human rights, because I think it links very well with this idea of the mother tongue, that everybody should have a right to study and master their mother tongue. And people say that if you do that, it helps you to think clearly, and you can get very good concepts. So we should not think that because we want to create an Afrihili, the mother tongue should disappear. And I think it's a very important foundation and the way he builds it up. Then there was the idea of the Mandela Institute. It kind of reminded me of what the Chinese are doing with this, their institutes. Confucius Institute. It kind of reminded me of that. And he's trying to say, let us form these centers where the issues of language, Pan-African languages and so on can flourish. And I think it's a great idea, and it should be, somebody should start to work on it. So the lecture, as you all heard, is very rich in ideas, and it gives us an opportunity to think about language and how we communicate and how languages form and why some languages get bigger than others and the need for people to communicate and so on. So I want to thank our speaker for enlightening us on something that some of us don't think about, but he's a master of that. So thank you very much, Professor Bodomo. Well done.
Thank you very much, Prof. And thank you, Prof, for the brilliant lecture. We want to acknowledge the presence of some schools, Presec Legon, if they are here. And then we also have ATTC. And Achimota Senior High. Then Accra Wesley Girls. And then we also have Accra College of Education. We also want to acknowledge the support of University of Education, Winneba. I want to acknowledge the support for this evening's event. Shall we take some few announcements and we'll be out of here? So we have an upcoming inaugural lecture to be delivered by Professor Richard Frimpong, or Pong, a fellow of the Academy. And he will actually be delivering the J.B. Dankwa Memorial Lecture on the theme, The Digital World and the Future of the Ghanaian Legal System, Reflections Ahead and its Consequences. And that will be on February 21st to 23rd at the same venue at 5:30. Ladies and gentlemen, there will be a light refreshment after this event, and we entreat all of you to stay behind and engage and interact and just network. So thanks to all of you for coming, and we appreciate your presence.